My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 29 years old, and I've been a registered nurse for 6 years. I work long shifts. I don't complain. And I don't miss details. That last part matters more than I realized back then. Because I grew up in a house where every detail was tracked, especially the ones tied to me. Not my grades, not my effort, not the fact that I stayed out of trouble. Just one number. The cost of keeping me alive? I was born with a hole in my heart. Ventricular septal defect. That's what the doctors called it. I don't remember the surgery itself. I was 4. But I remember everything that came after. The follow-ups. The medications. The quiet conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. And my father sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of paper. Bills spread out like evidence. The first time he said it, I was 8. I had asked for a new pair of sneakers because mine were splitting at the sole, and my socks got wet every time it rained. He didn't look at me. He just tapped the paper in front of him and said, $214,000. That's what you cost this family. He said it like he was reading a receipt. No anger. No yelling. Just a fact. And that was the moment something in my brain shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded like I understood. Even though I didn't fully get what $214,000 meant. What I understood was that I was expensive. And expensive things don't get replaced when they break. After that, I stopped asking for things. Not gradually. Immediately. By 12. I was finding ways to pay for my own school supplies. Babysitting. Cleaning neighbors' kitchens. Anything that didn't require a ride because I didn't want to ask for gas money. By 15, I had a system. I tracked every dollar I spent in a notebook. If I needed something, I figured out how to cover it before I even mentioned it out loud. Most of the time, I just didn't mention it at all. Meanwhile, my older sister Ashley lived a completely different life in the same house. She got a car at 16. Not a used one. A new one. She got her tuition covered without a conversation. She got birthday dinners at actual restaurants. Not a boxed cake and a quick, "we'll celebrate later" that never came. And I didn't resent her for it. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. I wasn't sitting in my room angry. I wasn't plotting anything. I genuinely believed it made sense. She didn't cost the family anything. I did. So of course she got more. That was the logic I built my life around. My father never had to explain it more than once. He reinforced it in small ways. Consistent ways. Comments at the dinner table. A look when I reached for something extra. A sigh when a medical bill came in the mail. Even years after the surgery. "You know how much we've already done for you?" He'd say. Like I might have forgotten. I never forgot. That number stayed with me. It followed me into every decision I made. When it was time for college, I didn't even consider asking for help. I filled out loan applications on my own. Signed every document myself. And chose nursing because it was practical. Stable. And would let me pay things back faster. Not just the loans. Everything. There was always this quiet pressure in the back of my mind. Like I was running a balance I could never fully see. I worked through school. Double shifts when I could. Nights. Weekends. Holidays. I told myself I was being responsible. Independent. What I was really doing was trying to prove I wasn't a bad investment. At home, nothing changed. Ashley's milestones were celebrated. Mine were acknowledged. There's a difference. When I got my nursing license, my mom hugged me and said she was proud. My dad nodded and asked what my starting salary would be. Not in a curious way. In a calculating way, like he was checking numbers against a ledger. Only he could see. And the thing is, I didn't hate him for it. That would have been easier. Hate gives you distance. I didn't have distance. I had obligation. I had this deeply ingrained belief that everything I did had to justify my existence in that house. So I became easy. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. If something felt unfair, I told myself I probably didn't have the full picture. If my dad made a decision that affected me, I assumed he had a reason. He always had a reason. Usually. It came down to money. And money, in our house, wasn't just money. It was control. It was memory. It was proof of sacrifice. By the time I was in my 20s, I had built an entire identity around being low maintenance. I was the daughter who didn't ask for anything, didn't cause problems, didn't need help. People at work would call me strong, independent, self-sufficient. They meant it as a compliment. I took it as a requirement, because the alternative, in my mind, was being a burden again. And I had spent my whole life trying not to be that. Looking back now, I can see how precise it all was. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just steady. Consistent conditioning. A sentence repeated enough times that it stopped sounding like an opinion and started feeling like a fact. You cost this family everything. He didn't need to say it every day. He only needed to say it enough for me to say it to myself. And I did. Every time I hesitated to buy something I needed, every time I worked an extra shift instead of resting, every time I chose silence over confrontation, I carried that sentence with me, like it was part of my job description, like it was printed on my badge right under my name. Lauren Hayes. Registered nurse. Financial liability. And the worst part is, I didn't question it. Not once. Not until everything fell apart years later, and I had to go back and look at where it started. It started at that kitchen table, with a stack of bills, and a number I never actually owed. I learned to move around the house like I wasn't supposed to take up space. Not in a dramatic way. Just small adjustments that added up over time. I'd wait until everyone else finished dinner before I went back for seconds. And most nights I didn't go back at all. I'd keep my voice low, my requests shorter, my expectations almost non-existent. It made things easier. For them. And honestly, for me too. Because the less I asked for, the less there was to say no to. Ashley never had to think like that. She walked into a room like she belonged there. Because she did. If she wanted something, she said it out loud. And most of the time, she got it. Not instantly. Not like our parents were throwing money around. But there was never that pause. That tension in the air when she spoke. No one pulled out a mental calculator when Ashley had a need. When she turned 16, my dad surprised her with a car. I remember standing in the driveway, watching her, run her hand along the hood like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a luxury car, but it was clean, reliable, and fully paid for. My dad stood there smiling, keys in his hand, proud, in a way I had never seen directed at me. I clapped. I hugged her. I said all the right things. And then I went inside and checked the bus schedule for my next shift at the grocery store. Nobody told me it was unfair. That's the thing. There was no big announcement. No explanation. Just patterns. Ashley needed a laptop for school. She got one that week. Mine started freezing during senior year. And I learned how to save my work every 30 seconds so I wouldn't lose everything when it crashed. Ashley talked about colleges like she was choosing between options. I talked about interest rates. When acceptance letters came in, hers came with congratulations and a family dinner. Mine came with a quiet nod and a question about how I planned to pay for it. I already had the answer. I always had the answer. Because I made sure I did, before anyone asked. I told them I'd take out loans. Work part-time, Maybe pick up extra shifts on weekends. My dad said. That's the responsible choice. Like I'd passed some kind of test. Ashley didn't have to take that test. She packed her bags for a state university. My parents funded in full. Tuition. Housing. Meal plan. Even a little extra spending money. I drove myself to a community college orientation in a car I didn't have. So I took 2 buses and showed up 20 minutes early because I didn't trust the timing. And here's the part that still surprises people when I say it out loud. I wasn't angry at her. I wasn't even angry at them. I had already accepted the rules. In my head, this was fair. Ashley was a return on investment. I was still a cost. So, of course, resources went where they made sense. That's how I justified it. Over and over, until it stopped feeling like justification and started feeling like truth. Me mom tried, in her own quiet way, to soften things. She'd slip me $20 sometimes when my dad wasn't looking. Or she'd make an extra portion of dinner and leave it in the fridge with a note. For later. She never said anything directly. She never challenged him. It was like she had accepted the system too. Just found small ways to work around it without breaking it. I didn't blame her. I didn't blame anyone. Blame requires a sense that something is wrong. I didn't think anything was wrong. I thought this was just how our family worked. So I adapted. I became efficient. I picked jobs that paid quickly. Shifts that didn't overlap with school. Responsibilities that didn't inconvenience anyone else. By the time I was 18, I had a routine that didn't involve my parents at all. I handled my own schedule. My own expenses. My own problems. If something went wrong, I fixed it or I worked around it. Asking for help didn't even cross my mind. It felt unnecessary. And honestly, a little embarrassing. Because asking for help meant reminding everyone of that number again. And I had spent years trying to make that number irrelevant. Ashley would come home on breaks and talk about her classes, her friends, the internships she was already thinking about. My parents listened, asked questions, engaged. When I talked about my job or my coursework, the conversation stayed short, not dismissive, just brief. Like there wasn't much to discuss. I didn't push it. I kept things surface level, easy to process. I made myself easy to be around. That became my role. The low-maintenance daughter. The one who didn't need anything. People outside our family thought it was impressive. "You're so independent," they'd say. "Your parents must be proud." I'd smile and nod. Because correcting them would have required explaining something I didn't fully understand myself yet. And deep down, I still wanted that version of the story to be true. I wanted to believe this was all a choice I had made, not something I had been shaped into. The hardest part wasn't what I didn't get. It was how normal it all felt. There were no big fights. No dramatic moments where everything broke. Just a steady pattern that reinforced itself every day. Ashley got support. I got expectations. She got encouragement. I got reminders. And I turned those reminders into rules for myself. Don't ask. Don't need. Don't cost anything. It worked. I stayed out of the way. I built a life that didn't rely on them. I became exactly what they needed me to be. And for a long time, I thought that meant I was doing something right. I started driving out to my grandmother Evelyn's house every Saturday without really planning it. Like my body just decided that was where I needed to be. It was about 40 minutes each way. A straight shot down, a quiet stretch of road that felt completely different from everything around my parents' place. Her house sat on a small corner lot with a porch that creaked when you stepped on it, and a garden she somehow kept alive no matter the season. Nothing about it was impressive. And that's exactly why it worked. There was no pressure there. No invisible scoreboard. No feeling like I had to justify being in the room. The first time I showed up after I moved out for school, She didn't ask why I hadn't visited more, or where I'd been. She just opened the door, looked at me for half a second, and said, "You look tired. Come in." That was it. No questions I had to prepare for. No tone I had to read. Just a simple statement and a place to sit down. I brought groceries with me most weeks. Nothing fancy. Just things I knew she liked or needed. Milk. Bread. Her favorite tea. Sometimes fresh fruit if I caught a good sale. She always tried to pay me back. I always said no. We had the same conversation every time. She'd insist. I'd refuse. And then she'd roll her eyes and tell me I was stubborn. It was the kind of routine that felt normal in a way my own house never did. We'd sit on the porch, or in the kitchen if the weather was bad. And she'd ask me about my week, not in a checklist kind of way, but like she actually wanted to hear the answer. "Did you eat today?" was one of her favorites. Not, "How's work?" or, "Are you making enough?" Just that, "Did you eat?" It sounds small, but when you've spent years being measured by what you cost, someone asking if you've taken care of yourself hits different. I didn't have to edit my answers with her. If I was tired, I said I was tired. If I was stressed, I said I was stressed. She didn't turn it into a lecture or a solution. She'd just nod. Maybe tell me a story about something completely unrelated. And somehow that made it easier to breathe. She never once brought up money. Not my loans. Not my job. Not anything tied to what I owed or didn't owe. It was like that entire part of my life didn't exist in her house. And because of that, I didn't feel like I had to be careful every second. I could sit there and not think about what I was costing someone just by being there. Over time, those Saturdays became non-negotiable for me. No matter how busy my week was, I made it work. I'd finish a shift, grab groceries, and drive out even if I was running on 4 hours of sleep. It didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like maintenance. Like if I skipped too many weeks, something in me would start to break down. My dad hated that I went. He never said it outright, but he made comments. "You're wasting gas." Or, "She doesn't even remember half the things you tell her." That wasn't true. Evelyn remembered everything that mattered. She just didn't perform it the way he expected. She didn't need to prove she was paying attention. You could see it in the way she responded. The way she'd circle back to something I mentioned weeks ago, like it was still sitting on the table between us. One afternoon, near the end, she said something that stuck with me in a way I didn't fully understand at the time. We were sitting in the kitchen, and her hands were shaking a little more than usual. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Like she was making sure I was actually listening. "I've taken care of a few things for you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "When the time comes, someone will find you." I remember smiling, squeezing her hand, and telling her she didn't need to worry about me. I thought she was just trying to comfort me. The way older people do when they start thinking about what they're leaving behind. I didn't ask for details. That was my default setting. Don't ask. Don't need. So I let it sit there without pushing it further. Looking back, that was probably the first time in my life someone had tried to hand me something without expecting anything in return. And I almost missed it because I didn't know how to receive it. She didn't bring it up again. That was another thing about Evelyn. She didn't repeat herself to make sure you got the message. She trusted that you would. Eventually. And she was right. I just didn't know how much that one sentence was going to matter later. The last few months before she passed, I started noticing small changes. She moved a little slower. Took longer to get up from her chair. Forgot where she put things sometimes. But when it came to conversations, she was still sharp. Still present. Still more aware than anyone gave her credit for. My father especially, He talked about her like she was already gone. Like she wasn't capable of making decisions anymore. That bothered me more than I expected. But I didn't say anything. I never did. I kept showing up on Saturdays. Kept bringing groceries. Kept sitting at that kitchen table like it was the one place where I didn't have to calculate my value before I spoke. The day she died was quiet. No warning. No long hospital stay. No drawn-out goodbye. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. My dad handled the funeral. Quick. Efficient. Minimal. He didn't want a big scene. I stood in the back. Listened to the service. And realized I had never said half the things I wanted to say to her out loud. Not because I didn't feel them, but because I had spent so long keeping things in that it felt unnatural to suddenly start expressing them. Afterward, people came up to me and said she talked about me all the time. I nodded, thanked them, and didn't really know what to do with that information. Because in my head, I had always been the quiet one. The one who stayed out of the way. The idea that someone had been talking about me like I mattered didn't quite land yet. I went back to work the next week. Back to my routine. Back to the version of myself that didn't take up space. But something had shifted. Even if I couldn't name it yet. There was a sentence sitting in the back of my mind that didn't belong to me. Someone will find you. I didn't know who. I didn't know when. But for the first time, there was a small part of me that wasn't trying to prove I deserved to exist. A small part that was just waiting to see what she had already set in motion. I remember checking the clock on my dashboard because I was doing the math in my head. Figuring out how much sleep I could get before my next shift. It was 4:17 inches the morning. Light rain. Empty road. The kind of quiet that usually makes the drive home feel shorter than it is. I had just finished a 12-hour overnight shift. The kind where your body is still running on adrenaline, but your brain is already shutting things down one by one. I was thinking about whether I should shower before sleeping, or just collapse and deal with it later. That was the last normal thought I had. The light ahead of me turned green, and I didn't slow down because I didn't need to. Then something moved fast from the left. I didn't even process it as a truck at first. Just headlights where they shouldn't be. Coming too fast at the wrong angle. There was no time to react. No time to hit the brakes or turn the wheel. The impact was immediate and violent. Metal folding in on itself, like it wasn't designed to hold anything together. My car spun. And for a second, everything went completely silent in a way that didn't make sense. No glass. No noise. Just this blank pause, like the world skipped a frame. Then everything came back at once. Pressure in my chest. Something warm running down the side of my face. A sharp, deep pain every time I tried to breathe. I remember trying to move my left arm and nothing happening. I remember thinking, clearly, this is bad. Not dramatic. Not panicked. Just a fact. Someone was shouting. I don't know who. There were hands on the door. Voices overlapping. And then the sound of metal being pulled apart. I must have said my name, because I remember someone repeating it back to me. Louder. Like they were trying to anchor me to something. Stay with me. Lauren. Stay with me. I tried to answer. But my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Everything started getting darker at the edges. Not like a light turning off. More like something closing in. The last thing I remember before everything went out was a paramedic leaning over me. His face too close. His voice too steady for how fast everything else was moving. After that, nothing. When I woke up later, I didn't know it had been 3 weeks. I didn't know anything that had happened in between. But I've been on the other side of that bed enough times to understand what those hours probably looked like. The ambulance ride would have been fast. Controlled chaos. Oxygen. IV lines. Someone calling ahead to the ER with a quick summary. Female. Late 20s. High-impact collision. Possible internal bleeding. Outside. Catherine's. The place where I worked? They would have been ready before I even got there. Trauma team in position. Surgical staff on standby. Everything moving in a rhythm that looks almost calm if you don't know what it takes to keep it that way. They cut clothes off without asking. They don't wait for permission when seconds matter. They would have assessed airway, breathing, circulation in under a minute. Called out injuries. Made decisions fast and without hesitation. I've stood in those rooms. I know how it sounds. Short sentences. No wasted words. BP dropping. Prep for or. We're losing her. Not emotional. Not detached. Just focused. Because that's how you keep someone alive. My injuries were serious enough that they didn't have time to wait. Traumatic brain swelling. Multiple broken ribs. Internal bleeding that wouldn't stop on its own. They took me into surgery within the hour. The first operation stabilized what they could. But it wasn't enough. The bleeding was still there. Still active. And they needed a second surgery. More time. A spécialiste. And that's where things shifted from medical to administrative. From what can be done to what is allowed to be done. In hospital, those are not always the same thing. Because I didn't have a spouse or children listed. The decision-making fell to my next of kin. My file still had my father's name on it. Robert Hayes. The same name that had been there since I was 18. Because he had insisted it should be. At the time, I thought it made sense. It was just a form. Just paperwork. I didn't realize how much weight that one line could carry. They called him that night. He showed up. That part is confirmed. What he did when he got there? I had to learn later. But before any of that, before the conversations and decisions that would follow, there was that room. The operating room I had worked in. Now the place I was lying in. Unconscious. Hooked up to machines I used to monitor for other people. Bright lights. Controlled temperature. The steady beeping of monitors tracking things I couldn't feel anymore. Heart rate. Oxygen levels. Blood pressure. Numbers that told a story my body couldn't speak out loud. Nurses moving with practiced precision. Surgeons focused on the task in front of them. Everyone doing exactly what they were trained to do. And somewhere in that process, there was a moment where the medical team had done everything they could within their authority. And the next step required a decision from someone outside that room. That's the part people don't see when they think about hospitals. It's not just about skill or effort. Sometimes it comes down to a signature. A yes or no from someone who isn't the one on the table. I wasn't aware of any of it at the time. I wasn't aware that my life was sitting in that space between what could be done and what someone was willing to approve. All I knew, much later, was that I had gone into that hospital as a nurse who understood exactly how fragile that line could be. And I had come out of it as a patient who had been placed on the wrong side of it for reasons that had nothing to do with medicine. I didn't hear it when it happened. But I've replayed that night enough times in my head that I can see it like I was standing right there at the nurse's station. My father didn't go to my room first. He didn't ask how I was doing or whether I had opened my eyes or even if I was still alive at that exact moment. He walked past the elevators, past the waiting area, straight to the billing department like he already knew where it was. That detail stuck with me when Maggie told me later. Most people get lost their first time in a hospital. He didn't. He walked in like he had one question and one question only. How much is this going to cost? Not what are her chances. Not what does she need. Just the number. The clerk pulled up my file. Started explaining estimates. Insurance coverage. Out-of-pocket ranges. My father listened the way he always did when money was involved. Quiet. Focused. Like every word mattered. Then he asked to speak to the doctor in charge. That's when he met Dr. Harris, the surgeon managing my case. Maggie said they stood a few feet away from her station. Close enough that she could hear everything without trying. Doctor, Harris explained the situation clearly. The first surgery had stabilized me, but there was still active internal bleeding. I needed a second operation. More time in the OR. Possibly a specialist, depending on what they found. He gave a range for the cost. $180,000 to $240,000. Depending on complications, insurance would cover part of it. But there would still be a significant amount left. My father didn't interrupt. He let the doctor finish. He even nodded once, like he was following along. Then he asked one question. "And if we don't do it, doctor?" Harris paused. Maggie said it was the kind of pause you only hear when someone is choosing their words carefully. "Then she likely won't survive," he said. Direct. Honest. Exactly what a doctor is supposed to say. There wasn't any confusion in that moment. No gray area. No uncertainty. My life had been reduced to two options. And both of them were clear. My father didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for a second opinion. He didn't ask for time to think. He didn't ask to see me. He just said it. "Let her go." Maggie told me the words came out flat. Like he was canceling a service he didn't want anymore. Not angry. Not emotional. Just done. "Doctor." Harris didn't respond right away. He looked at my father for a few seconds. Probably waiting for something else. Some sign that this was shock-talking or fear or anything that could be worked through. But there was nothing else. My father kept going. "We're not paying for another surgery," he said. "She's been a financial drain her whole life." Hearing that part later didn't surprise me as much as it should have. It fit too neatly with everything I had heard growing up. It was the same sentence. Just updated for the situation. Only this time, the cost wasn't about sneakers or school supplies. It was about whether I got to keep breathing. "Doctor." Harris tried again. From what Maggie said, he explained the risks. The chances. The fact that I was young. That I had a strong chance of recovery with the right intervention. He did his job. He advocated. And my father shut it down the same way. He always shut things down when the numbers didn't work for him. "She doesn't have a healthcare proxy," he said. "I'm her father. I make the decisions." That part mattered because it gave him authority. Without a proxy on file, the hospital follows next of kin. It's policy. It's legal. It's how decisions get made when a patient can't speak for themselves. My father knew that. Of course he did. He had always been careful with paperwork. With signatures. With anything that could be used later. "Doctor." Harris nodded. "Because that's what protocol requires." And then my father asked for the form. Not a consultation. Not a discussion. The form. The Do Not Resuscitate order. Maggie said she felt it before she fully understood what was happening. That shift in the room where everything slows down for a second because your brain is trying to catch up to what you're hearing. He took the pen without hesitation. No shaking. No second thoughts. He signed it at 11:18 m. Maggie remembered the exact time because she looked at the clock the second he put the pen down. Like she needed to anchor that moment to something real. He placed the form back on the counter. Asked if there was anything else he needed to sign. And when there wasn't, he turned and walked toward the elevator. He didn't come to my room. He didn't stand by the glass. He didn't look at me, hooked up to machines he had just decided would eventually be turned off. He left the building the same way he came in. Focused. Efficient. Like he had taken care of something that needed to be handled. And the worst part isn't even what he said. It's how consistent it was. There was no sudden shift. No moment where he became a different person. This was the same logic he had used my entire life. just applied to the final decision. Cost versus value. Input versus return. And in his calculation, I didn't make the cut. When Maggie told me all of this, she didn't soften it. She didn't try to protect me from the details. She gave it to me exactly as it happened. Because that's what I needed. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to her repeat his words, and feeling something settle into place in a way it never had before. Not shock, not even anger at first. Just clarity. Every comment, every look, every decision that had ever made me feel like I was too much, too expensive, too difficult, suddenly lined up into a single, undeniable pattern. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't me being sensitive or overthinking. It was real. And it had always been real. The only difference now was that there was a document with his signature on it, proving exactly how far he was willing to take it. He didn't just think I was a burden. He acted on it when it mattered most. And while I was lying in that hospital bed, completely unaware, relying on someone else to decide whether I lived or died, my father made his choice based on a number, not my life, not my future, not anything I had worked for or built or become, just a number on a page. Maggie didn't move right away after my father walked out. Because when something that wrong happens in front of you, your brain needs a second to catch up to your training. She had been a nurse for nearly 3 decades, which means she had seen every version of fear, grief, and bad decisions people make under pressure. But this wasn't panic or confusion. This was deliberate. And that's what made it different. She told me later her hands were gripping the edge of the station counter so tight her knuckles went white. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she was deciding how far she was willing to go to fix something that technically followed protocol, but was completely wrong in reality. Then she sat down, logged into the system, and opened my employee file. Every nurse at St. Tess, Catherine's fills out a detailed onboarding packet when they're hired. Most people rush through it. Check the basic boxes. Skip anything that feels optional. I didn't. 3 years earlier, during a slow afternoon after a double shift, I had filled out every section carefully, including the one most people ignore. Healthcare proxy. I had listed Emily Carter, my best friend from nursing school, because she was the one person I trusted to make a decision based on me, not on numbers. Maggie found it in under 2 minutes. Name. Phone number. Relationship. Everything clearly documented, time-stamped, and legally valid. She didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and called Emily at 11:14 p. Place. Emily answered on the second ring. Maggie didn't ease into it. She didn't soften the situation or give a long explanation. She said exactly what needed to be said. Accident. Critical condition. Second surgery needed. Father signed a DNR. You are listed as the decision maker. Emily didn't ask for clarification. She didn't ask for time. She said one sentence. I'm leaving now. She lived 45 minutes away in Cherry Hill. But that night it took her 90 because of the rain and the way people drive when they don't understand urgency. She walked into the hospital at 12:51 a.m. Soaked, out of breath, holding her driver's license and a printed copy of the Proxy form she had kept in a folder at home. That part always gets me. She had kept it, not because she expected to use it, but because she took it seriously. The moment I wrote her name down, Maggie met her at the front desk, brought her upstairs. And within minutes, Emily was standing in front of Dr. Harris with the authority my father had claimed didn't exist. The first thing she did was revoke the DNR. No hesitation. No second-guessing. She wouldn't choose this, she said. Maggie told me her voice was shaking, but her words were clear. That's the difference between fear and uncertainty. She was afraid, but she wasn't unsure. Doctor. Harris didn't argue. He didn't need to. The moment a valid proxy steps in, the authority shifts immediately. That's the system working the way it's supposed to. He confirmed the documentation, had Emily sign the necessary forms, and called the surgical team back in. They were already on standby. Surgeons don't go far when a case is still open. Within the hour, they had me back in the operating room, continuing a procedure that should never have been paused in the first place. While all of this was happening, my father was already home. As far as he knew, the process he had set in motion was still moving forward. Machines would be turned off. Time of death would be recorded. And someone from the hospital would call him in the morning. That call never came. Not because anyone informed him of the change, but because there was nothing to report except that his decision had been overridden by someone who actually followed my wishes. Maggie didn't call him. Emily didn't call him. No one did. The focus stayed exactly where it needed to be, on keeping me alive. But Maggie didn't stop there. After Emily signed the forms and the surgical team took over, Maggie went back to the station and opened a different file. Internal Incident Report. It's the kind of documentation most people never hear about unless something goes wrong. And even then, it usually stays buried in administrative records. Maggie knew better. She documented everything. The time my father arrived, the conversation with billing, the exact wording he used with Dr. Harris. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. She's been a financial drain her whole life. She included the timestamp of the DNR signature. Eneist, osimneist, M. And the fact that he had stated I had no healthcare proxy when one was clearly on file. Every detail was written down. Not interpreted. Not summarized. Just recorded exactly as it happened. That's what makes it powerful. Facts don't need emphasis when they're this clear. She filed the report under protocol concern, attached her name to it, and locked her computer before the end of her shift. Then she sat alone in the break room for 20 minutes. Just sitting with what had happened. She didn't know me outside of work. I was just another nurse on the schedule. Another name on a badge. But in that moment, she made a decision that went beyond her job description. She chose to make sure there was a record. Because records don't argue. They don't forget. And they don't change their story later. That report would sit in the system. Quiet. Official. Waiting. Not for me to wake up. Not for my father to come back. But for the moment, someone needed proof of what actually happened in that hallway at 11:18 p.m. And that moment was coming. I just didn't know it yet. I was still unconscious while all of this was happening. Which is probably the only reason my father thought he could get away with it. As far as he knew, the situation was already handled. He had signed the DNR, walked out of the hospital, and gone home expecting a call the next morning, confirming I was gone. That was the version of reality he was operating in. So instead of checking on me, instead of calling the hospital, he spent the next day doing something else entirely. He went after my grandmother's house. At that point, Evelyn had been gone for 3 months. The house was sitting empty. And to anyone on the outside, it probably looked like a standard estate situation waiting to be sorted out. What my father didn't know, and what I didn't know yet either, was that the house had already been legally transferred into my name before she passed. The paperwork had been handled quietly, through an attorney she trusted, recorded properly with the county. Clean. Official. Done. But my father never saw those documents. He assumed the house was still up for grabs. And he moved fast. He already had access to my old signatures from years of medical forms, school documents, anything I had signed when I was younger and didn't think twice about it. He used that, He created a power of attorney document with my name on it, copying my signature closely enough to pass a quick glance. Not perfect, but convincing enough, if no one looked too hard, and he made sure no one would. He took that forged document to a notary he knew. Someone who owed him a favor or didn't ask questions, which is usually the same thing. The notary stamped it, signed off, and just like that, my father had a piece of paper that gave him legal authority to act on my behalf. That's all it takes sometimes. One document, one stamp, and a system that assumes honesty unless proven otherwise. He went straight to the county recorder's office and filed a deed transfer, moving the house out of my name and into his. No waiting period. No red flags. Because on the surface, everything looked legitimate. A valid power of attorney. A clean transfer. Nothing that would trigger an immediate review. By the next day, the house legally belonged to him. And he didn't stop there. Ownership wasn't the goal. Liquidity was. Within a week, he walked into a bank and used the house as collateral for a mortgage. $280,000. That's what the property was worth to him. Not as a home. Not as something my grandmother had spent decades building. But as a number he could convert into cash. The bank processed it like any other loan. Title check. Appraisal. Paperwork. Everything lined up because the fraudulent transfer hadn't been challenged yet. From their perspective, he was the rightful owner. The money was approved, released, and deposited. $280,000. Sitting in his account within days of me lying in a hospital bed. Still hooked up to machines he had already decided to turn off. That alone would have been enough. But the part that pushed it further, the part that made everything snap into place later, was what he did with the money. It didn't go toward my medical bills. It didn't go into savings. It didn't sit untouched while he figured out a plan. He spent it. Fast. And not on anything that could be explained away as necessary. When Daniel Keller started digging into the records later, he found the trail. Payments to offshore betting sites. Cash withdrawals that lined up with known gambling locations. Transfers that didn't connect to any legitimate expense. It wasn't subtle. It was a pattern. My father had debts. Significant ones. The kind you don't talk about at family dinners or church gatherings. The kind that build quietly over time until they start demanding attention. And instead of dealing with them directly, he found a shortcut. My house. My inheritance. My name. He used all of it without hesitation. Because in his mind, it was already his to use. That's the part that still stands out to me. There was no internal conflict on his side. No moment where he questioned whether this was crossing a line. He had already crossed that line years ago in smaller ways. Decisions that seemed manageable at the time. This was just the next step. Bigger. Riskier. But following the same logic, if something could be turned into money, and he needed money, he would do it. And if I was in the way, or if my existence complicated things, he had already shown he was willing to remove that variable. That's what makes this part hit differently. It wasn't just theft. It was timing. He didn't do this years earlier, when I could have noticed. When I could have asked questions. He did it while I was in a coma. When I had no way to respond. No way to protect myself. No way to even know it was happening. He built an entire plan around the assumption that I wouldn't wake up. And if I hadn't, it probably would have worked. The house would have stayed in his name. The mortgage would have remained in place. The money would have been gone. And no one would have connected it back to a forged document, because there would have been no one left to challenge it. Everything would have looked clean on paper. That's the danger of systems that rely on documentation. They're only as honest as the people using them. And my father knew exactly how to move within that space without triggering immediate suspicion. At least for a while. Because forged signatures don't hold up forever. Eventually, someone looks closer. Eventually, details don't match. Eventually, the timeline starts to raise questions. And when Daniel Keller pulled the records and saw the transfer date, the mortgage filing, and the lack of any legitimate power of attorney in his own files, the entire structure my father had built started to crack. I didn't know any of this while it was happening. I was still lying in that hospital bed, recovering from surgeries I was never supposed to have. But the moment I opened my eyes and started asking questions, that timeline became mine. And once it did, everything he had done in those few days became evidence. Not just of what he took, but of exactly how far he was willing to go when he thought no one was watching. I opened my eyes to a light I knew too well. The kind that makes everything look flat and unforgiving. And for a second, I forgot which side of it I was supposed to be on. My throat felt raw. My chest tight. Every breath, shallow and deliberate, like my body was negotiating with itself just to keep going. I tried to move, and realized immediately that nothing responded the way it should. My left arm was heavy. My ribs screamed when I inhaled too deeply. And even blinking felt like work. The first face I saw wasn't my father's or my sister's. It was Maggie's. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, watching the monitors, the way we all do when we're waiting for numbers to stabilize. When she noticed, my eyes were open. She didn't rush. She pulled a chair over, sat down next to me, and took my hand like she had all the time in the world. "You're safe," she said, calm and steady. "We'll talk when you're ready." I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a cracked whisper. "How long?" 3 weeks?" she said. "You've been out for 3 weeks. That number didn't land right away. It just sat there, like everything else in that room, waiting for me to catch up." I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was tired, but because I was trying to piece together the last thing I remembered. The drive, the light, the impact, then nothing. When I opened them again, Maggie was still there, watching me carefully, like she was deciding how much to say and when. My father came later that afternoon. I know the exact time now, because I checked the logs afterward. He stood in the doorway for a second before stepping in. And I watched his face the way I've been trained to watch patients' families. There's always a moment before the expression settles. A fraction of a second, where you can see what's actually there before it gets covered. I saw it. Not relief, not shock. Something closer to surprise. Like the outcome didn't match what he expected. Then it was gone. He moved quickly, came to my bedside, grabbed my hand. Tears already in place, like they had been waiting for their cue. "We were so scared," he said. "I never left your side." I didn't argue. I didn't question it. I just looked at him and said, "Hey, Dad." My sister sent flowers that evening. Generic arrangement. Probably ordered online. She didn't come. I didn't think about it much at the time. My brain was still catching up to basic functions, and everything felt slow. Like I was moving through something thicker than air. 2 days later, I could sit up on my own. That's when Maggie closed the door, pulled the chair closer, and decided it was time. She didn't ease into it. She didn't ask if I wanted to hear it. She just started. "The night of your accident, your father came to the hospital," she said. "He spoke to your surgeon about the cost of your second surgery." I stayed still, hands resting on the blanket, listening. "He said you didn't have a healthcare proxy. He said he was the decision maker." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't interrupt. And then he signed a Do Not Resuscitate order. The room didn't change. The monitors kept beeping at the same steady rhythm. Nothing dramatic happened. But something in me shifted, like a piece that had been loose for years, finally clicked into place. He signed a DNR. I repeated. On me. Yes. Maggie said. She didn't look away. He said, let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. She's been a financial drain her whole life. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I recognized it. The sentence wasn't new. The context was, this wasn't a comment at the kitchen table. This was a decision made in a hallway that determined whether I lived or died. And he used the same logic he always had. For the first time, I wasn't trying to justify it. I wasn't trying to understand his side. I was just seeing it for what it was. Clear. Consistent. Final. I opened my eyes again. Then why am I alive? Maggie's answer was simple. Because I found your healthcare proxy. Emily Carter. I called her. She came here and overrode the DNR. I let that sit for a second. Emily. Of course it was Emily. Is there a record of what he did? I asked. Maggie nodded. Incident report. Time-stamped. His exact words. That's when everything shifted. Not emotionally. Logically. For most of my life, I had responded to things by adjusting myself. Making things easier. Staying quiet. Avoiding conflict. That approach doesn't work when someone has already decided your life is negotiable. This wasn't something I could smooth over or ignore. This was something that required a different kind of response. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. Maggie handed it to me without asking why. There were missed calls from my father. From Ashley. Messages. I didn't open. None of that mattered right now. I went straight to my contacts and found a name I hadn't used in months. Daniel Kela. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Daniel Killer. His voice was calm. Measured. The kind of voice that doesn't react until it has all the information. My name is Lauren Hayes. I said. My grandmother. Evelyn Brooks. He cut me off gently. I've been trying to reach you for months. That got my attention? I adjusted myself in the bed, ignoring the pull in my ribs. I've been in a coma. I said. I'm in the hospital. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for him to recalibrate. Then he explained. My grandmother had set up a will through him. Privately. Notarized. Filed. The house was mine. The funds were mine. He had tried to contact me. But someone had told him I had moved and didn't want to be reached. I didn't need to ask who. Is the house still in my name? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Let me check the current records. He said. I'll call you back. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, letting the information settle. My father had tried to let me die. And while I was unconscious, he had likely done something else. Something connected to what my grandmother had left me. I could feel the pieces lining up. Even without all the details yet, Maggie was still in the room, watching me. What time did he sign the DNR? I asked. Inaist? Osemnaist po? M. She said. I noted it in my phone, not because I needed to remember it, but because I was starting to build something. Not a reaction. A timeline. 53 minutes later. My phone rang. Daniel Keller again. The property was transferred out of your name 3 weeks ago. He said. To your father. Using a power of attorney. I didn't feel shocked. I felt focused. I never signed a power of attorney. I said. I know. He replied. Which means it's likely forged. That was the moment the last piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about what he had said in that hospital hallway. This was about what he had done afterward. Assuming I wouldn't be here to respond. There's also a mortgage on the property. Keller continued. $280,000. I picked up a pen and started writing everything down. Amounts. Dates. Names. Not because I needed to remember, but because writing it made it real, in a way that thinking about it didn't. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked. I looked at the list in front of me. Then at the door of the hospital room. Then back at the ceiling. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see everything first." That was the decision. Not anger. Not confrontation. Not a reaction driven by emotion. Strategy. For the first time in my life, I wasn't adjusting myself to fit the situation. I was preparing to change it. I adjusted my grip on the folder in my bag as I stepped through the front doors. Because once I walked in, there wasn't a version of this where I could walk back out and pretend none of it happened. The service was already underway. Voices blending into that familiar rhythm of hymns and quiet responses. And for a second, it felt like any other Sunday. I slipped into the last row, sat down carefully, and looked toward the front. My father was exactly where he always was. Front row. Straight posture. Hands folded. The kind of presence people trust without questioning. When he turned and saw me, his face lit up immediately. Relief. Pride. Something warm enough to sell the story he had already decided to tell. He gave me a small wave. The kind that says everything is okay now. I returned it. Just enough to keep things moving. I didn't come here to interrupt the service. I came for what happens after. By the time the congregation moved into the fellowship hall, the room had filled with that low, comfortable noise of people who knew each other well. Folding chairs. Paper plates. The smell of coffee and casseroles. Nothing out of place. About 120 people. Give or take. Enough to matter. Enough to make sure what happened next wouldn't disappear into a quiet conversation later. My father was already at the microphone when I walked in. He didn't wait to be asked. He never did. He tapped the mic once, smiled at the room, and started exactly the way I knew he would. "I want to share something personal today." His voice carried easily. Steady. Practiced. As many of you know, my daughter Lauren was in a serious accident. She was in a coma for 3 weeks. The doctors weren't sure she'd make it. He paused. Just long enough for the room to lean in. But God is faithful. And today, she's here with us. He turned toward me, extending his arm like he was presenting proof of something bigger than himself. Heads turned. People smiled. A few clapped. I stood where I was, near the back wall, and let them look. As a father, he continued, his voice tightening at exactly the right moment. There is nothing more terrifying than almost losing your child. I prayed every night. I never left her side. The sentence landed clean. No hesitation. No doubt in the way he said it. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed him too. That's the part that almost impressed me. Not the lie itself, but how easily it fit into the version of him everyone already accepted. He opened his arms slightly, inviting me forward. I walked. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just steady. Each step felt deliberate. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew exactly what this moment was. When I reached him, I didn't hug him. I looked at him and said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "Can I say something?" He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. Not here. Not now. "Of course," he said, handing me the microphone with a smile that hadn't faded yet. I took it, felt the warmth from his hand still on it, and turned toward the room. For a second, I just looked at them. People I had seen my entire life, but never really been seen by. "Thank you for your prayers," I said. My voice was steady. "I'm grateful to be standing here. But I need to correct something my father just said. The room shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel it. My father's smile tightened by a fraction. He wasn't by my side. I continued. He came to the hospital once. The night of the accident. He didn't go to my room. He went to billing. A few people exchanged glances. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. He asked how much my surgery would cost. And when they told him, he said, "And this is documented. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. She's been a financial drain her whole life." Silence. Not the kind that feels calm, the kind that presses in. Then he signed a Do Not Resuscitate order. I could hear someone inhale sharply somewhere behind me. A chair shifted. My father stepped closer. "Lauren." "Stop," he said. Low enough that it almost didn't carry. "You don't know what you're saying." I didn't look at him. "I have the hospital report," I said. Time-stamped. His exact words. I paused. Just long enough for that to settle. I'm alive because someone else made the decision he refused to make. The door to the hall opened. And I didn't have to turn to know who it was. "This is Daniel Keller," I said, as he walked in, briefcase in hand, moving at the same steady pace I had. "He's my grandmother's attorney." That name landed. People recognized it. My grandmother had been part of this community for decades. Keller set his briefcase down, opened it, and stood beside me without saying anything. Yet, he didn't need to. His presence was enough. "Before she passed," I continued, "my grandmother transferred her house and savings to me. Legally. Privately. My father didn't know." I could feel the room tightening again. While I was in a coma, he forged my signature on a power of attorney. He transferred the house into his name. And then he took out a $280,000 mortgage against it. The reaction wasn't loud, but it was immediate. A plate dropped somewhere in the back. Someone said something under their breath. My father's voice came out sharper now. "That's not true." Keller spoke for the first time. "Calm. Precise. I have the original will here. The property is listed solely under Lauren Hayes. There is no valid power of attorney on file." He held the document just high enough for the front rows to see the seal. My father looked around the room, searching for something to hold on to. Familiar faces. People who had trusted him for years. No one stepped in. No one spoke for him. "She's confused," he said, grasping for something that sounded reasonable. "She's been through a lot." "I've been through a lot," I said, finally turning to look at him. "And you added to it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked toward Ashley. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them I was trying to protect the family." Ashley stood up slowly. For a second, I thought she might actually do it. Repeat the version we had all lived with for years. But she didn't look at him. She looked at the floor. "I knew," she said, her voice barely holding. "About the DNR. About the house." That was enough. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She walked out before anyone could ask her to explain. And just like that, whatever structure my father had built in that room collapsed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just piece by piece. In real time. In front of people who couldn't unhear any of it. I set the microphone down on the table. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. This wasn't about humiliating him. It never was. "I'm not here to destroy him," I said, looking back at the room. "I'm here because this is the truth. And you deserve to know who's been standing up here all these years." No one clapped. No one spoke. They just looked. At him. At me. At the space between what they thought they knew and what was actually real. And in that silence, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one adjusting to fit the room. I set the folder down on the table and stepped away from the microphone. Because once the truth is out, there's nothing left to perform. The room didn't move right away. People stayed where they were, processing, looking at him, then at me, then back at him again, like they were trying to match what they had just heard with the version of him they'd known for years. No one rushed to defend him. No one tried to smooth it over. That silence followed him out of the building. And it didn't stop there. It carried into the next day. And the day after that. And it showed up in places he couldn't control. Monday morning. The bank froze the mortgage on the house. That happened fast. Faster than most people expect. Because once a title is flagged as disputed, lenders don't wait around to see how it plays out. They protect themselves first. The funds he had already taken were now unsecured. And the property he used to get them was no longer something he could claim cleanly. By noon, someone from the bank's fraud department had contacted Daniel Keller, asking for documentation. Keller sent everything. Original will. Probate records. Proof that no valid power of attorney existed. Clean. Organized. Undeniable. That same afternoon, a process server knocked on my father's door and handed him the court summons. Motion to void the deed transfer. Fraud investigation pending. He signed for it. Because he had to. And for the first time, he was the one being handed paperwork he couldn't control. The police opened a case within days. Forgery. Fraude? Mortgage fraud. Not complicated charges. Just serious ones. The kind that don't depend on interpretation when the evidence is this clear. The notary he used didn't hold up under pressure. People rarely do when their name is attached to something illegal. He cooperated. Provided statements. Confirmed that he hadn't verified my presence or consent when he stamped the document. That closed the gap my father might have tried to hide behind. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a technical error. It was intentional. The court moved quickly after that. There's a difference between cases that drag and cases that resolve. And this one had everything lined up from the start. The deed transfer was voided. The house was restored to my name. The mortgage remained. But not on me. On him, $280,000 tied to a property he no longer owned. That kind of mistake doesn't get absorbed quietly. It follows you. He tried to negotiate at first. From what I heard, called the bank, called the attorney, tried to frame it as a family issue that got out of hand. That approach works when there's room for interpretation. There wasn't any here. He took a plea deal. No prison time, but full restitution, probation, and a record that doesn't go away just because you want it to. He sold his house to cover part of the debt. It wasn't enough. It rarely is when you've been building problems in the background for years. The rest of it will stay with him. Payments. Interest. Consequences that don't care about how he explains them to anyone else. The church removed him from his position within the week. That decision wasn't dramatic either. No public statement. No long explanation. Just a quiet vote and a phone call. He didn't argue. He didn't show up. People stopped calling him for work. Not all at once, but enough that it mattered. When trust is the foundation of what you do, losing it changes everything. I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. The outcome was already clear. Ashley called me a few days later. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was different. Not controlled. Not composed. I knew, she said right away. Like she didn't have the energy to build into it. About the DNR. About the house. He told me. I didn't stop him. I didn't interrupt. Let her say it. I was scared. She added. I didn't know what to do. I understood what she meant. Fear can keep you quiet longer than it should. But understanding isn't the same as excusing. You made a choice. I said, not harsh, not soft, just accurate. There was a long pause on the line. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to forgive me. That part mattered. She wasn't trying to fix it with words. If you want to talk? I told her. We can, but not like before. Not pretending none of this happened. She agreed. That's where it stands. Not repaired. Not broken beyond recognition. Just honest for the first time. A month later, I drove back to my grandmother's house. My house. I parked on the same street, walked up the same steps, and used my key to open the door. The air inside still carried her scent. Something clean and familiar that hadn't disappeared just because she was gone. I set my bag down. Walked through each room slowly. Not to check anything. Just to be there. No one else's voice. No expectations. No calculations running in the background. Just space. I sat in her chair by the window and let it be quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty. The kind that feels earned. For most of my life, I thought being a good daughter meant absorbing whatever came my way. The comments. The imbalance. The decisions that didn't make sense, but weren't mine to question. I thought staying quiet was part of the deal. That if I just kept things easy, everything would stay manageable. It doesn't work like that. Silence doesn't fix anything. It just delays the moment when you have to deal with it. Setting a boundary isn't revenge. It's not about getting even or making someone pay. It's about deciding what you will and won't carry anymore. That's the part I had wrong for years. I thought I owed something I could never fully repay. I don't. You don't either. You don't owe anyone your health. You don't owe anyone your home. And you don't owe anyone your life. Those things aren't negotiable. No matter who is asking, I still work at the hospital. Same floor. Same hours. Same routines. Maggie treats me exactly the same as she did before. Which is exactly what I needed. Emily still calls to check in. Not because she has to, but because that's who she is. And me. I sit in the front row now when I go to church. Different place. Smaller room. People who don't already have a version of me in their heads. I'm not trying to prove anything there. I'm just not hiding anymore.